The old man sat in his prison cell, his hands moving across the paper. He was drawing a face, a woman's face. Her eyes looked sad, her hair pulled back. The drawing was detailed, almost perfect. But this wasn't just any drawing. This was a memory. A terrible memory. The man's name was Samuel Little. He was 78 years old, and he had a secret that would shock the entire country. But let's go back to the beginning, because Samuel Little's story didn't start in a prison cell. It started many, many years ago. Before we continue this story, let me know in the comments below. Where are you watching this from? Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Samuel Little was born in 1940 in Georgia. His childhood was not happy. His mother and grandmother raised him, but they moved around a lot. They went from city to city, never staying in one place for long. Young Samuel didn't have a stable home. He didn't have many friends. He felt like nobody really cared about him. As he grew up, Samuel started getting into trouble. Small things at first: stealing, breaking into stores, getting into fights. By the time he was a teenager, the police knew his name. He went to jail for the first time when he was just 16 years old. But here's the strange thing. Every time Samuel got arrested, it was always for small crimes: stealing a car, breaking into a house, fighting with someone. The police would catch him. He'd go to jail for a while, then he'd get out and do it all over again. Nobody suspected what else he was doing. Nobody imagined the truth. Samuel Little was a big man. He stood over 6 feet tall and was very strong. He was a boxer when he was younger, and his hands were powerful. He could throw a punch that would knock someone out cold. He also moved around a lot, just like when he was a child. He traveled from state to state: California, Florida, Ohio, Texas, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana. He never stayed in one place for long. He was always on the move, like a shadow passing through cities. And everywhere he went, something terrible happened. But nobody connected the dots. Nobody saw the pattern. Not yet. In different cities across many years, women started disappearing. These weren't famous women or rich women. They were women that society often ignored. Women who were homeless. Women who struggled with drugs or alcohol. Women who worked on the streets. Women who had hard lives and few people looking out for them. When these women vanished, sometimes their bodies were found. Sometimes they weren't. When bodies were discovered, police would investigate, but many cases went cold. The cases were filed away, forgotten. Why? Because these women seemed invisible to the world. They had no families calling the police every day, no news reporters telling their stories, no reward money for information. They disappeared like smoke, and the world barely noticed. But someone did notice them. Samuel Little noticed them, and that's exactly why he chose them. Samuel Little had a strategy. He was smart about it, terrifyingly smart. He knew exactly who to approach. He would look for women who were alone, women who seemed vulnerable, women who might need help. He would drive around in his car, searching. When he found someone, he would be friendly, charming even. He would offer them a ride, maybe offer them food or money. He seemed helpful, like a kind stranger. These women would get into his car, thinking they were safe. They had no idea what was about to happen. Samuel Little would drive them somewhere quiet, somewhere away from people, somewhere nobody would hear them scream. And then he would attack. He used his boxer's hands. He would choke them until they stopped moving. He was so strong that it didn't take long. Then he would leave their bodies in places where they might not be found for days, weeks, or even years. Empty fields, behind dumpsters, in alleys, in the woods. Then he would drive away to another city, another state. He would disappear, and the pattern would start again somewhere new. This went on for decades, through the 1970s, through the 1980s, through the 1990s, through the 2000s. Year after year, city after city, Samuel Little kept going, and he kept getting away with it. Now, you might be wondering, how could someone do this for so long without getting caught? How could the police not see what was happening? There are several reasons. First, remember that Samuel Little chose victims who were often invisible to society. When they disappeared, investigations weren't always thorough. Sometimes their deaths were listed as drug overdoses or accidents, not murders. Second, Samuel Little was always moving. A murder in California one year, a murder in Florida the next year, another in Ohio after that. Different states, different police departments. Back then, police departments didn't share information the way they do now. A detective in Los Angeles didn't know about a similar case in Miami. They were all working separately, not seeing the bigger picture. Third, Samuel Little was careful. He didn't use weapons like guns or knives that could be traced back to him. He used his hands. He didn't leave much evidence behind. And he chose locations where bodies might not be found quickly, giving time for evidence to disappear. But even the cleverest criminals make mistakes, and Samuel Little's time was running out. In 2012, Samuel Little was living in a homeless shelter in Kentucky. He was 72 years old now. His life of crime had finally caught up with him in small ways. He had been in and out of jail many times over the years for drugs and theft. But then something happened. Police in California were looking into old cases, cold cases that had never been solved. They had DNA evidence from 3 murders that happened in Los Angeles back in the 1980s. 3 women had been killed, and their cases had gone cold. Technology had improved since the 1980s. DNA testing was much better now. The police could do things they couldn't do 30 years ago. They ran the DNA through a database, a computer system that stores DNA information from criminals all over the country. And they got a match, Samuel Little. The police in California were surprised. Samuel Little's DNA matched DNA from 3 different murder scenes from the 1980s. 3 women. 3 unsolved cases, all connected to this one man. In 2012, police officers traveled to Kentucky. They found Samuel Little at the homeless shelter. They arrested him and brought him back to California to face trial. In 2014, Samuel Little was found guilty of murdering 3 women, Carol Alford, Audrey Nelson, and Guadalupe Apodaca. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. The case was closed. Justice had been served. Samuel Little would spend the rest of his life behind bars, or so everyone thought. But this was just the beginning of the real story. Samuel Little sat in his prison cell. He was old now, in his late 70s. His health was failing. He had heart problems and diabetes. He knew he would die in prison, and maybe that's when something changed in his mind. Maybe he wanted to talk. Maybe he wanted to be remembered. Maybe, after all these years of secrets, he wanted to tell the truth. In 2018, a detective named James Holland came to visit Samuel Little in prison. Detective Holland worked for the Texas Rangers, and he was an expert at getting people to talk. He was patient. He was smart. He knew how to build trust with even the most difficult criminals. Detective Holland sat down with Samuel Little and started asking questions. Not demanding, not aggressive, just talking, listening, and slowly Samuel Little started to talk back. At first he spoke about small things, his childhood, his travels, his life on the road. Detective Holland listened to everything, never interrupting, never judging. He just let Samuel Little talk. Then one day Samuel Little said something that made Detective Holland's blood run cold. "I killed more than 3 women," Samuel Little said quietly. "A lot more." Detective Holland stayed calm. "How many more?" he asked. Samuel Little looked at him. His eyes were tired, but there was something else in them, too. Maybe pride, maybe relief, maybe something darker. "I killed 93 people," Samuel Little said. 93. The number hung in the air like a dark cloud. Detective Holland couldn't believe what he was hearing. If this was true, if Samuel Little was telling the truth, then he wasn't just a serial killer. He was the most prolific serial killer in American history. But could it be true? Could one man really have killed 93 people over several decades without anyone? It seemed impossible. It seemed like the kind of thing that only happened in horror movies. Detective Holland needed proof. He needed to verify Samuel Little's claims. So he did something clever. He asked Samuel Little to describe the murders. When did they happen? Where did they happen? What did the victims look like? And Samuel Little remembered. He remembered everything. Even though some of these murders had happened 30 or 40 years ago, Samuel Little could describe them in detail. He could tell you what year it was, what city he was in, what the woman was wearing, where he left her body. He even started drawing pictures. Remember those drawings from the beginning of this story? Samuel Little drew the faces of his victims from memory, dozens of faces, each one carefully detailed, each one a real person who had disappeared years ago. Detective Holland took this information and shared it with police departments all across the country. He sent them the descriptions, the dates, the locations, the drawings. And then something amazing happened. Police departments started finding matches. They went back to their cold case files, cases that had been unsolved for decades. They found cases that matched Samuel Little's descriptions perfectly. A woman found dead in Miami in 1984. A woman who disappeared in Cleveland in 1991. A woman discovered in a field in Mississippi in 1982. Case after case after case, all matching Samuel Little's confessions. The drawings helped, too. Police would show Samuel Little's drawings to people in different cities, asking, "Do you recognize this woman?" And sometimes people did. A sister would recognize her sibling. A friend would recognize someone they hadn't seen in 30 years. The drawings brought names back to faces that had been forgotten. Slowly, painfully, the truth came together like pieces of a puzzle. Samuel Little had been telling the truth. He really had killed dozens and dozens of people, and he had gotten away with it for almost 50 years. The FBI got involved. This was too big for just one detective or one police department. If Samuel Little really had killed 93 people across different states over 50 years, this was a national case, one of the biggest criminal investigations in American history. The FBI created a special team. They worked with Detective Holland and police departments from all over the country. Together they started the difficult work of matching Samuel Little's confessions to real cases. It wasn't easy. Many of the cases were very old. Some of the police files had been lost or destroyed over the years. Some bodies had never been found. Some victims had never been reported missing in the first place because they had no family or friends looking for them. But the team kept working. They checked every detail Samuel Little gave them. They looked at old newspapers. They searched through dusty file boxes in police station basements. They contacted medical examiners who had looked at bodies decades ago, and the confirmations kept coming. One case verified, then another, then another. The number grew, 10 confirmed cases, then 20, then 30, then 40, then 50. By 2019, the FBI had confirmed that Samuel Little had killed at least 60 people. 60 confirmed murders. and they believed all 93 of his confessions were probably true. They just needed time to verify the rest. The FBI made an announcement to the public. They released Samuel Little's drawings. They asked for help from anyone who might recognize the women in the pictures. They set up a website where people could see all the information, and they confirmed what everyone had feared. Samuel Little was officially the most prolific serial killer in United States history. So who were these victims? Who were the 93 people that Samuel Little killed? They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends. They were real people with real lives, even if those lives were difficult. Many of them struggled with addiction. Some were homeless, living on the streets. Some worked as prostitutes to survive. These were women living on the edges of society, women who didn't have safety nets to catch them when they fell. Samuel Little knew this. He specifically chose these victims because he knew the world wasn't paying attention to them. He once said in an interview that he picked women who wouldn't be missed. That's a terrible thing to say, but it shows how calculated he was. Let's talk about some of his victims, the ones police were able to identify. There was Mary Jo Brosley from Florida. She disappeared in 1974. Her case went cold for 45 years until Samuel Little confessed to killing her. There was Audrey Nelson from California, one of the 3 murders he was convicted for. She was 35 years old when she died in 1989. She had a daughter who never knew what happened to her mother until Samuel Little was caught. There was Denise Christie Brothers from Washington. She was only 38 when she died in 1994. Her case was listed as a possible overdose for years. It wasn't until Samuel Little confessed that police realized it was murder. There was Patricia Parker from Mississippi. She was 21 years old. Samuel Little killed her in 1982, and her body was found near a cemetery. Her case went unsolved for 37 years. Each victim had a story. Each one was a person who mattered. But for decades their deaths were mysteries. Their families had no answers. The world had moved on and forgotten them, until Samuel Little decided to talk. Now, here's something important to understand. While Samuel Little confessed to 93 murders, police were only able to confirm about 60 of them with solid evidence. Why couldn't they confirm all 93? Sometimes the victim's body was never found. Samuel Little would describe killing someone in a certain city in a certain year, but police couldn't find any record of a body matching that description. Without a body, it's very hard to prove a murder happened. Sometimes the police records from that time period were lost. Remember, some of these crimes happened in the 1970s and 1980s. Not every police department kept perfect records back then, especially for cases involving people society ignored. Sometimes the death was recorded as something else: an overdose, an accident, natural causes. The medical examiner didn't realize it was murder at the time, and now it was too late to check again because the body had been cremated or buried decades ago. But investigators believe Samuel Little was telling the truth about all 93 cases. His details were too specific. His drawings were too accurate. The cases he described, even the ones they couldn't fully confirm, matched patterns they saw in areas where he had been. One detective said, "He has nothing to gain by lying. He's already in prison for life. He's dying. Why would he confess to murders he didn't commit?" It was a good question, and most experts agreed that Samuel Little was being honest, as strange as that sounds. Let us talk about the timeline of Samuel Little's crimes, because it is important to understand just how long this went on. His first murder was probably in 1970. That's 54 years ago from today. He killed a woman in Miami, Florida. He was only 30 years old. Through the 1970s, he killed regularly. moving from state to state, from city to city, always finding new victims, always getting away with it. The 1980s were his most active years. During this decade, he killed more people than any other time period. He traveled constantly: California, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi. He was like a storm moving across the country, leaving death behind him. In the 1990s, he continued. He was older now, in his 50s, but he didn't stop. The murders kept happening. In the 2000s, he started to slow down. He was in his 60s now. His health wasn't as good. He wasn't as strong as he used to be. His last known murder was in 2005. He was 65 years old. That means Samuel Little killed people for 35 years. 35 years of murder. That's longer than many people's entire careers. Longer than some people's whole lives. And during all that time, he was also getting arrested for other crimes. He went to jail for theft, for assault, for drug possession. He served time in different prisons. But he would get out, and he would start killing again. The pattern never stopped until he was too old and sick to continue. When the FBI released Samuel Little's drawings to the public, something unexpected happened. People started coming forward with information. They recognized the faces in the drawings. A woman in Ohio saw one of the drawings and gasped. It looked exactly like her sister, who had disappeared in 1991. She had spent 28 years wondering what happened to her sister. Now she had an answer. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but at least it was an answer. A man in Texas recognized a drawing as a woman he used to know from his neighborhood. She had vanished in 1987. Everyone assumed she had just left town. Nobody imagined she had been murdered. A daughter in Kentucky saw a drawing that looked like her mother. Her mother had been found dead in 1984, and the police said it was probably drugs. Now, 35 years later, she learned the truth. It wasn't drugs, it was Samuel Little. These drawings helped solve cases that had been cold for decades. They gave families closure, even though the closure was painful. At least they knew. At least they understood what had happened to their loved ones. Samuel Little's drawings were strange in another way, too. They were good, really good. He had an artist's eye for detail. The faces looked real, like photographs. It was disturbing to think that someone who had done such terrible things could create something that required such careful attention and skill. But maybe that's part of what made him so dangerous. He paid attention. He remembered. He noticed details that other people missed. Those same skills that made him a good artist also made him a successful killer. Samuel Little gave many interviews from prison. Reporters and investigators would sit with him, and he would talk about his crimes. He would describe what he did, how he did it, why he did it. These interviews are hard to watch. Samuel Little sometimes seemed proud of what he had done. He would smile when talking about his victims. He would call them by nicknames he had made up. He seemed to enjoy the attention he was getting. When asked why he killed so many people, Samuel Little's answers were chilling. He said he liked the feeling of power. He liked controlling whether someone lived or died. He compared it to hunting. He also said something that explained a lot about why he got away with it for so long. He said, "I picked people nobody would believe or look for. I picked women doing something they shouldn't be doing. I picked the ones I knew wouldn't be reported missing right away." This was his strategy. This was how he stayed hidden for decades. He understood that society treats people differently. He knew that when certain people disappear, the world doesn't look very hard for them, and he used that knowledge to keep killing. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it is important to understand because it is part of the reason Samuel Little's crimes went unnoticed for so long. Samuel Little's case changed how police investigate serial killers. It taught law enforcement some important lessons. First, it showed that police departments need to share information better. If detectives in different states had been able to compare notes earlier, they might have seen the pattern. They might have connected the cases. But back in the 1970s and 1980s, there wasn't good technology for sharing information across state lines. Now there are better systems. The FBI has databases where police from anywhere in the country can enter information about unsolved murders. Computers can spot patterns that humans might miss. Second, it showed that all victims matter, regardless of who they are. For too long, cases involving certain victims weren't investigated as thoroughly as they should have been. Samuel Little knew this and used it to his advantage. After Samuel Little's case became public, many police departments started looking at their cold cases differently. They started reopening cases of women who had been found dead under suspicious circumstances, even if those cases were very old. Third, it showed the importance of DNA technology. Samuel Little was finally caught because of DNA evidence from the 1980s that was retested with modern technology. Without that DNA match, he might never have been caught at all. In 2020, Samuel Little died in prison. He was 80 years old. He died in a hospital in California, where he was serving his life sentence. His death brought an end to his story, but not to the pain he caused. Families were still trying to identify victims from his drawings. Police were still working to confirm his confessions. The investigations continued even after he was gone. Samuel Little never showed real remorse for what he did. He never apologized to the families. He gave his confessions, yes, but many investigators believe he did it for attention, not because he felt sorry. Some of his victims have still never been identified. There are drawings on the FBI website where the woman's name is listed as unknown. Police know Samuel Little killed them, but they don't know who they were. They're still trying to find out, hoping that someone, somewhere, will recognize the face in the drawing and give that victim back her name. What can we learn from the story of Samuel Little? What does this case teach us? It teaches us that evil can hide in plain sight. Samuel Little was arrested many times throughout his life. Police knew him, but nobody suspected he was killing people. He seemed like just another petty criminal, not a serial killer. It teaches us that every person matters. Samuel Little's victims were often ignored by society because of their struggles with addiction, homelessness, or poverty. But they were still people. They still deserved to live. They still deserved justice. It teaches us that justice can be slow, but it can still come. Some of Samuel Little's crimes went unpunished for 40 or 50 years, but eventually the truth came out. Eventually he was caught. Eventually the families got answers. It also teaches us to be careful. Samuel Little appeared friendly. He seemed helpful. He offered rides to people who needed them. His victims trusted him, and that trust cost them their lives. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always look dangerous. The story of Samuel Little is one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. For nearly 50 years, he moved through the country like a ghost, leaving death in his wake. He killed 93 people, making him the most prolific serial killer the United States has ever known. But this story isn't just about Samuel Little. It's about his victims, too. It's about the women who lost their lives. It's about the families who spent decades wondering what happened to their loved ones. It's about the investigators who refused to give up, who kept working on cold cases, who finally brought the truth to light. Today, the FBI still has a page dedicated to Samuel Little's victims. You can see the drawings. You can read about the cases. Some victims have been identified. Others are still unknown, still waiting for someone to recognize them and say, "That's her. That's the woman I knew." The case reminds us that behind every statistic, there's a person. Behind every cold case file, there's a family waiting for answers. And it reminds us that justice, even when it takes decades, is still worth pursuing. Samuel Little is gone now, but the work continues. Police are still investigating. Families are still searching for answers. And slowly, one by one, the victims are being remembered, their names restored, their stories told. There was somebody. They mattered. And now, finally, the world knows what happened to them.